Welcome everyone to another one of our ZoomInfo webinars. Thank you all for joining us. Today we're talking how to conduct B2B sales prospecting in a GDPR world. My name is Rebecca Stanton. I am a Senior Demand Gen Manager here at ZoomInfo, and I have a wonderful panel of experts here. We have Simon, he is our Chief Compliance Officer. We have Nadim, he's the Director of Revenue and Growth. And then we have Jacques, he's our Product Marketing Manager, talking all things international or global data. So very excited to have this conversation with everybody today. All right, so let's kick things off. Nadim, I'm gonna start with you. And everybody speaker-wise, feel free to jump in and provide any points after any of these questions that I'm reaching out to you guys. I don't want this to be a stark panel. I want us to really be able to cultivate a conversation and get our audience on board with what we're talking about today. But Nadim, I'm gonna start with you first. What is one piece of advice that you would give to ZoomInfo customers today when it comes to data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that data really sits at the core of any business, and it really is the fuel for the go-to-market motion. So you may care about things like opportunity creation or pipeline velocity, conversion rates, forecasting accuracy, and ultimately revenue generation. However, it's basically the motions that you use that data in, and it's the breadth and depth of the data that you use in order to really try and drive the success that you want to try and drive within your go-to-market motion. So it has to be accompanied by the right motions. You know, like an example that I would potentially use here is like you could have the best quality steak to cook on a barbecue, but if you don't cook it right, it defeats the object of that investment. So having the best data is where it all begins. But in order to make sure that you utilize it in the best fashion, you need to make sure that you're running the right motions to have the most impactful results.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So Simon, can you talk a bit about what sellers and marketers need to take into account when they're prospecting across borders?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I want to register as the token vegetarian on the panel. I don't agree with Nadim's steak analogy at all. I like data, I don't like steak, so I'm making that in passing.
You can cook other things on the barbecue as well, Simon.
That's fine, yeah. So next time, some of the kind of halloumi skewers would be great, Nadim. So in terms of sellers and marketers working cross-border, it's a great question. I think, if I think back to when I was a regulator at the Information Commission's Office, and when I worked with firms before that as well on global privacy programs, what struck me throughout there is that it's very easy for everybody to get focused on the differences between different countries, when in reality, across all of data protection regulation, but especially when it's getting down to the support activities that sellers and marketers have, 80%, 90% of the regulation in each country that has regulation is pretty much the same. And when I was a regulator, you know, I cared about the same things as all the other regulators. So what kind of things am I talking about there? I'm talking about transparency. I'm talking about fairness. I'm talking about making sure that if you've got somebody's data, you've given them some kind of notice that if they want to change the data or want to opt out of your service or delete their data, that you respect those data subject rights. All those things are, to a lesser or greater extent, universal where there's privacy regulation. And nowadays, for most organizations, they're also seen as good practice anyway. So the first point I made, Rebecca, around cross-border work is that if you have the basics right, you're likely already 80% towards compliance in any particular country. So I'd focus on that first. And normally, if you're working within a field where you think you're being ethical and fair, and you are managing and meeting your user expectations, whoever those people may be, then you're normally a long way down the road to actually being compliant. And that all said then, and we'll talk about this, I think, more in this discussion, so I won't delve into much detail now, then there is some local variation. So obviously, within Europe and separately within the UK, you have the GDPR, and then you have similar regulation, plus or minus a bit within California and in many other parts of the world nowadays as well. And then you have other bits of regulation which also are quite stringent but might be slightly differently built, such as in Singapore and South Korea. So you do then have to go, okay, if we're going to operate in these markets, what are the differences? What is not covered by this general baseline approach? But I would say you get most bang for your buck by focusing on the fundamentals, and then you look at the details afterwards. The one other thing I'd make now, the other point I'd make now, Rebecca, before we move on, is the other thing I think that has to be taken into account in compliance as well as in the rest of the go-to-market motion is culture. Even if you have the same regulation in certain countries, certain cultural expectations mean that people within one country are more or less likely to be concerned about call recording, or might be concerned around being contacted by phone versus email. So you have to think about local cultural expectations as well. And that's completely different to the rule and regulation. But if you don't think about culture, then your campaigns will be less efficient from a compliance point of view, but I think likely less efficient in general as well.
Yeah,
I think that's
oh, go ahead, Nadeem.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's a really important point that Simon mentioned there around culture. We're seeing that more and more in the market that we work in. So I'm responsible for the European market here at ZoomInfo. And, we need to be very mindful of the way that we interact with our customers, how we interact with them in Ireland, and the UK will be very different to how we would interact with them in France or Germany, for instance. So having that knowledge of kind of cultural differences and the frameworks that they work within is very, very important.
Yeah. And I think also partnering with a product. Oh, sorry. I think also just partnering with a product that is going to give you some of that cultural influence into the data, right? So at ZoomInfo, a lot of our customers, they have a challenge when they're going into a new market, understanding the different types of business titles that might be different in that market, right? So a managing director in the UK versus a CEO in the US. So we've built a bunch of tools to be able to help customers navigate some of that cultural stuff, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to do a little bit of legwork at the start.
Yeah, that's a great example, Jack. I think Germany will probably come up a few times in this conversation because in some ways it is the most distinct market and often with the most challenges to work in from a prospecting mindset within Europe. And at the same time, it's obviously an incredibly lucrative market. But I think your titles point is a great one there because there's a lot of senior folk in Germany that have gone and got additional qualifications. And when you get to the C-suite, you get a lot more doctors and various other qualifications that you wouldn't necessarily get elsewhere. And my experience of working with German professionals is often they actually quite like those terms. They're very proud of the work they've put in to get those terms. So making sure you get that right is probably more important than I think in the UK, where they're probably a little more relaxed about that. Likewise, I think Germany's a great example of where culture can come into play in terms of using different channels. I understand anecdotally that phone prospecting, phone contact in Germany is quite hard. Lots of people don't like being called up about B2B marketing discussions. It's a natural thing in Germany because of the double opt-in around emails to think that maybe phone marketing is a better channel, but that has to be done very carefully. It's very context specific, and often if you get it wrong, you'll create some ill will with a German prospect.
Awesome. There's a lot of great details around compliance and the different regulations in different areas, and we'll get into probably some more details as we go through this conversation. But I think one thing you all haven't mentioned yet, and I know that is when you're not thinking about these regulations. So Nadeem, I think part of when we're not thinking about these regulations, yes, the importance is how we're going to then affect those regions when we're interacting with them. But then on the actual interaction side, where you're coming from and you're purchasing that data, what is that cost of bad data to your team, and how can that affect when you're interacting with these different areas and all the regulations on top of it?
Yeah, I think when an organization sets out on a go-to-market motion, there are loads of things that are top of mind, and better yet, there are loads of challenges that, one organization is looking to solve, right? So those may be things like, we need to improve our lead response times. We need to improve our average win rate. We need to improve our rep productivity or forecasting accuracy. Or at a very high level, we need to grow revenue. We need to improve our retention rates. So bad data will have an impact on all of those things that I mentioned. And I'll say it again, right? You are what you consume. Data is no different. So I think, having the cost of bad data will directly impact all of those things. And I personally feel that it also impacts, team morale, employee productivity, and even staff retention. So it is at the core of what we do, and so critical in making sure we get it right.
Definitely. Okay, so Simon
can probably speak to this even further, but I mean, bad data can also lead to a costly compliance issue as well, right? So if you're conducting outreach to someone who's on a do not call list or who has already unsubscribed or opted out of your services, that could potentially lead to a big headache for your team. So on one hand, there's the efficiency gap that's a big cost, but on the other hand, you're also facing compliance risks, which could be even a bigger headache for your team.
Yeah. And Jack, it can be even more basic than that sometimes. So within the GDPR, and this was the same in the original Data Protection Directive of 1995, so this is not a new concept at all. Data accuracy is in itself a principle. So you have an obligation, if you are what Europeans call a data controller, the person in charge of the data, that if you have data about a person, personal data, you have to keep that data accurate. That's one of your compliance obligations. And it's often forgotten because people are focused on other aspects of compliance. They're focused on subject access requests or international data transfers and the like. But as Jacques says, bad data accuracy leads to lots of compliance and reputational risks, and is often the one of the key underlying factors. And that's one of the key things which I've spoken about a lot with customers of ZoomInfo is using ZoomInfo is a shortcut to good data accuracy. And in doing so, it bypasses a range of these other issues. You're contacting the right people, you're addressing them in the right way. And also it means that if you have good data accuracy and they want to actually opt out of your database, not receive marketing, ask any questions, you're going to be able to find their data and map it and discuss it with them rather than have to rummage around and try and work out who it is that's calling you.
Awesome. Simon, so a little bit on that same vein, is there any, besides, utilizing ZoomInfo, what are some compliance practices that benefit ZoomInfo customers or that you would recommend when someone is interested in signing up with ZoomInfo?
So in terms of what customers should be thinking about, one of the key things I think is to understand within a European terminology sense, when they become what I mentioned before, a data controller. So that's when you're in charge. So if they're a customer of ZoomInfo, whilst we are our own data controller, when we share data with customers, they become their own data controller, which means they have their own relationship with the people that they are engaging with for sales and marketing purposes. And likewise, if they have any kind of other partnership agreements, they're collecting data from individuals directly or they're collecting it indirectly from other providers, they've got to understand when they take responsibility for that data and when they might be what's called a data processor, which is when you're working under the orders of somebody else versus a data controller. Because as soon as you become a data controller, Rebecca, then you take responsibility for the whole range of GDPR compliance obligations. And that means you have to make sure that you find a way to notify the individual that you have their data. And I won't bore you with the legalese here, but you've got to say things such as, hi, I'm this company, and here's my contact details. This is how I'm going to use your information. This is how you contact me if you don't want me to do this with the data, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got to make sure that you do all the basics around the data, you're keeping it secure, et cetera, et cetera. Then effectively, if the individual contacts you, you've got to manage the opt-out process and so on and so forth. So as soon as you become a data controller within the European set, you pick up all these obligations. and you do need to work through that. The good news is that now, because GDPR is actually getting a little bit old, it's been around for since 2018 now. There's plenty of good guidance out there. The guidance from the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK is very well written. It's good plain English stuff, but there's plenty of other market commentary. So if you are embarking on this and really getting your arms around the GDPR for the first time, just realize that you have these obligations. As soon as you're processing information about anybody in Europe, you have these obligations, and then go from there.
Awesome. All right. So Jacques, Simon, teased it a little bit, the benefits of ZoomInfo and how that can help support, being more compliant in whichever region you're trying to market into or sell into. But let's dive a little bit more deeply into that. What are the benefits of ZoomInfo providing more than just what most people know of us for, phone numbers and email address data? How does that help overcome compliance fears around GDPR or other marketing laws across the UK and Europe?
Yeah, so this ties really well with what Simon was talking about, but it's really at the core ZoomInfo's approach to our products, right? We want to be a fully revenue operational system, right? So we want go-to-market teams to log into ZoomInfo and be able to do their entire day within our platform. So your question, there's a couple of things I want to break down there. And first would be explaining at a high level the difference between data privacy regulations like GDPR and then broader marketing laws that occur in the EU or Canada. Simon mentioned the double opt-out in Germany, right? So regulations like GDPR, those were created to provide individuals more control over their personal data. And it helps ensure that their personal data is adequately protected when it's collected, stored, and processed by businesses. And so from a privacy perspective, we at ZoomInfo, we've built a ton of amazing product features that work on top of or in parallel to our global data. So some of those examples are going to be opt-out lists that we make available to all our customers in the platform. And that allows our customers to remove any contacts they've obtained from ZoomInfo unless they themselves have an independent lawful basis to process that information. We also offer a do not call toggle. So that's an admin feature that admins can go into the platform and that will hide phone numbers found in various global do not call registries. So that includes the UK, France, Germany, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US. I'm sure Simon can talk about how we're trying to build more of those. And finally, we're going to offer customers the ability to add on a compliance API. And that helps our customers identify duplicate records of individuals who have opted out, boosting their confidence that their organization is fully honoring individual requests to opt out. So now on the marketing side, those laws are typically localized at the local market level, and they're typically over concerns over consent that one party has to get from a B2B contact before they can actually conduct sales and marketing activities with that contact. So a lot of European countries and the UK, they require some sort of informed consent or a soft opt-in before they can contact those prospects. And at ZoomInfo, we've built a whole host of features and products that help drive aspects of that informed consent or the soft opt-ins. One example would be Form Complete. So that maximizes website conversions, it improves lead quality, and really what it does is it offers a single field for customers to have that's going to be, ameliorated by our global data, but also allows you to put in an opt-in request into that form, and then suddenly you're able to reach out to that prospect on your own terms. Another example would be our chat functionality and products. So that turns your website into a digital storefront. You can create opportunities to drive consent from prospects through your chat function. And that's just a start of a whole myriad of options that we have to cover those.
Awesome. Okay, Simon. So all of that, is what we have currently. And so really what I would love to hear from you is what initiatives you have in place or would like to implement to drive greater trust and transparency among customers. So looking ahead to 2023, as a second part of this conversation or question, what are your top priorities regarding regulatory compliance and data privacy?
Yeah, so we've got a lot going on here at ZoomInfo right now. We relaunched our Privacy Center this year, which is just a part of the website that covers all aspects of our privacy compliance. And that's broken into 3 parts, Rebecca. That covers, firstly, and we give priority to this, if we have people in our database, how they claim their profile, how they can update their data if they want to, and indeed how they can opt out easily if they want to, because we want to make that as simple as possible. It then has part of the website that explains what we do to be compliant ourselves. And then the third part is what our customers can do and should be doing around their own compliance. So, we can't provide legal guidance, everyone has, but we can help our customers think through how they meet their own regulatory obligations and maximize the value of the data which we can provide them with. So those are the 3 chunks that we break our privacy center into. And if people are interested, then that's just on our website, and we're looking to put more and more collateral and thought leadership into that as we go. Recently, we've had another look at how we manage our notifications process. Effectively, what happens right now is that as soon as we create a new record within ZoomInfo, we notify the individual in real time. And we do that globally as a standard, which is, we think, market leading. So regardless of whether there's no regulatory obligation, we still do that. What we're now doing is actually going back to some of our older records, which have been sitting around sometimes for a number of years within the database, and re-notifying. So we're going to try and catch up there, which is pretty boring in some way, but we want to keep on trying to keep up with everything, and actually keep on trying to engage with people on our database and make sure they're aware that they're there. So we're doing that. We're also trying to do some work on helping the whole data industry raise its game. We are aware that sometimes there's poor practice across the industry, and that we're aware that different organizations have different standards that they're working to. But we're also aware that many organizations out there, including some of our competitors, have good practice and are trying to do the right thing. So we're working through an organization called the Business Information Coalition, and we're working with some of our peer and competitor organizations to really share good practice and understand what we can do collectively to make sure that everybody's data is handled correctly in B2B marketing. And anything which improves the overall industry is good for all of us. So those are the things that we're trying to do right now to raise our game. If I'm looking further into the future, Rebecca, then the thing that gets me really interested is work around what's often called privacy-enhancing technologies. So there's a whole suite of different tools out there, homomorphic encryption, secure multi-party computing, federated learning, synthetic data, where clever technology is making it possible to get lots of value and analytics from data sets without actually surfacing the underlying data, without having to share all the data with everybody. And we're really interested in thinking through how we can use our market-leading data and privacy-enhancing technologies to create new value for customers. And that's a long-term play, but that's where we want to go with this. We don't just want to be focusing on GDPR-compliant, which is all very good. We want to work out how we can use our data in a privacy-compliant, privacy-respectful way to get new value from the data.
Awesome. Okay, so one thing for the audience members here, we'll make sure that that Privacy Center is linked in our follow-up emails with the recording of this session in there, so you guys have direct access to that, easily be able to find it, because I think there's a lot of great things in there that we might not be able to cover everything in this session. So definitely we'll make sure that you guys have access to that easily and can check that out. So that's really great. And then two, I think just tossing it over to Nadeem, Simon talked a little bit about how we're trying to help support our customers and training and such like that around all of these data regulations. So what are the expectations on your team from a training or learning perspective when it comes to data privacy regulations? And a part two to this is, has it led to more positive customer conversations?
Yeah. I think so. At the core here at ZoomInfo, we're continuously talking about driving customer excellence in our conversations. That's just the approach that we take. And in order to truly drive that, you need to be able to drive proactive, consultative conversations with your customers on a topic that is of interest to them. And in order to drive those more, consultative conversations, you really need to kind of understand what's important to the customer, what are the things that keep them up at night and what really matters most to them. So in this particular topic or in this particular reference, we're talking about things like data privacy, we're talking about compliance, we're talking about GDPR, and these may be some of the things that are at the heart of their concerns. So in my opinion, and for my team, it's absolutely critical that every member of my team comes across knowledgeable and uses the resources that we have available to us. So in this case, we've got the likes of Simon, we've got Simon's team to drive those types of positive, proactive customer conversations. I truly feel that every relationship is built on trust, and a relationship with customer is no different. So by proactively having these conversations with our customers, it further solidifies the foundation of the relationship that we have with them and puts us in a position of strength and trust.
Yeah. And it's, I think that Nadeem raises a great point. My team has got more and more involved in customer conversations over this year. And I think that's indicative of the fact that privacy compliance and privacy just as an area has become more pressing for lots of organizations. And they are very careful about who they engage with, and they have questions to make sure that how we've collected our data, how we manage our data, etc., is generally okay. Most of those questions are quite basic, to be honest. I mean, sometimes we get somebody involved who really enjoys the minutiae of it, and we all have a good old nerdy chat around some aspect of GDPR compliance, and that's all fine. But very often, it's more just the basics, especially I think in the European market where ZoomInfo's brand is still growing compared to the US market. They need to understand who we are. They need to understand that we have a team in place. It is the largest team in the market, but there's no reason why people should know that. And how we manage our information sources and our GDPR controls. And once we've covered that, then the conversations very quickly go on to that second question of, okay, now I'm going to have access to this data and it's really powerful. How can I use it? And that's when we get onto these questions around privacy and electronic marketing communication regulations, what you can do in different countries, and how you can get value as you use ZoomInfo's data to contact people.
And I think one topic that is always interesting when we talk with customers is just educating them a little bit on the difference between business contact information and personal contact information, right? Because those are treated very differently by regulators, and there's a whole lot of media attention and regulatory attention on personal information. But at the end of the day, the data that ZoomInfo gives our customers access to is really focused on business contact data. That's contact data that you're going to find on someone's business card or LinkedIn, et cetera. So at the end of the day, I think we spend a lot of our time just trying to distinguish and highlighting the exceptions to rules like GDPR for business contact information, et cetera. That's a really key thing that we train our sales and marketing teams on.
Jack, that's a great point, because we don't underestimate the importance of compliance, and the data set we have is very, very large. And so even though the information we collect is limited, very limited, it is a very large data set. So we take it seriously. But if I go back to when I was a regulator at the ICO, then we were very often having discussions as to, well, what's the actual risk of harm to people from this data? And the data that we are providing through our services is basically data that you would see on a resume or on a CV. It's phone numbers, and emails, and basic career information. And as such, the risks of harm are quite low when you compare it to a data broker picking up 500 pieces of information, including your geolocation and your families and your pets and your preferences. We're not interested in any of that, because all we're trying to do is help business people talk to business people about business. So I wouldn't want to give the impression in any way that we didn't take things seriously, but we are conscious of the fact that we are working in a slightly lower risk part of the market, because we're not trying to gain insight into people's personal lives. We're very, very focused on their business lives.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm just going to remind the audience that we have time for some audience questions, so feel free to start submitting those if you haven't already. If you have any questions for our speakers, And I'm going to toss it back to Jacques. And I know you guys have been talking a lot. You're keeping me on my toes with these questions that we have written, because you guys are definitely chomping at the bit to give everybody all the information you have. So I apologize in advance if you've answered this question already. But Jacques, what tools are you leveraging, or is ZoomInfo leveraging, to get the most accurate data on a go-to-market activities?
Yeah, way too many to mention. The first tool for me personally that I would highlight would be Chorus. So Chorus is our conversation intelligence solution at ZoomInfo. So as a product marketing manager here, I need to be at the table with our customers and our sellers to understand personas and pain points and even competitive intelligence. So Chorus actually allows me to create filtered views into custom topics that I'm interested in across the sales organization, and I can review snippets and calls and customer feedback all from the comfort of my own house on my own time, right? So I get accurate, timely feedback about our ideal customer profile, competitive intelligence, new and emerging competitors, and that allows me to actually turn these data points into actionable selling and marketing activities, whether it's trainings or marketing positioning, etc. The second tool that I'll mention that's really effective in our sales organization is our sales engagement solution, Engage. So this is powered by ZoomInfo's completely accurate global compliant data. And Engage allows me to conduct email and phone outreach to prospects, customers, if I want to set up a survey or an interview. And I can import contacts directly from SalesOS or my CRM or a manual file. And Engage will import those contacts, and I can actually target them from that platform. And here's my favorite part. When I import those contacts, I can actually test all the email addresses against our proprietary cleaning process, and that's called Never Bounce. And Never Bounce can actually remove up to 99.9% of bounced emails from your list. So that's giving you way more accurate data to conduct your go-to-market activities. And it means that your targeting is going to be more effective, and you don't have to worry about hurting your email sender score. Now, the last thing I'm going to touch on is really a data capability that we have in our platform. And it allows you to get way more insight into your ideal customer profile, and that's technographic data. What is technographic data? Well, it's information about technologies that companies are using within their tech stack, and it's organized by category or vendor or a specific technology itself. And it allows you to search at the appropriate level for your particular use case. Honestly, without technographic data, your go-to-market strategy might just be less effective than that of your competitors. So at ZoomInfo, we're delivering insights into tech solutions used by more than 30 million companies, and we can now track the use of 30,000 technologies, allowing our customers to get more accurate in their targeting for their sales and marketing campaigns.
I'm going to make a quick comment on that, Jacques. That was really well said. I think, Rebecca, going back to your first question that you posted to me about, what's one piece of advice that you could give, right? And I said that, I used a terrible analogy of the barbecue. So Simon, forgive me for that. I will definitely not use that ever again. But the point that I was making is that you can have all of the tools and you can have all of the data and everything in your grasp, right? But it's what you do with those tools that then truly makes an impact on anything that you set out to do. So to Jacques' point, all of the 4 different things that he mentioned there, like the conversation intelligence piece is absolutely critical in my world, because I'm now able to be everywhere without being anywhere, which is really powerful, because I can then take that information and then use it to educate my team and go back to the business, to people like Simon, or to people within finance, or to people within enablement, or to, Jacques works very closely with our team to then continuously evolve my team's knowledge on what are we hearing in the market, what are some of the challenges that we're coming across, what are the things that the customers care about the most. And that way we're then able to further emphasize our learnings and then come back to the table with a much more consultative approach and a much stronger messaging. So it's really, really important that, you utilize your stack in the right way. But again, like the core of all of that sits with the data. That's a great point.
Awesome. And Jock, you might have mentioned this just within our conversation, but I want to just make sure that we're definitely clearly hitting this for the audience. What controls are in place to ensure the accuracy of the information that is being added to ZoomInfo?
Yeah, this is a question that we probably get asked every single day, particularly on the product side, right? So at a high level, the way ZoomInfo approaches this is we have a 5-step quality assurance program. So we process 1.5 billion data points every single day. And first, we're sourcing that B2B data from the widest set of possible sources. We're looking at both proactively looking for new data points, but we're also focused intently on enriching existing data or missing data points. Then we're going to leverage a team of 300 researchers, analysts, data engineers, data scientists, along with world-class machine learning algorithms to qualify, publish, and then monitor post-publish of those data points. And the final thing that I'll say that really sets ZoomInfo apart in this is our traceability system that we have in place. So our research team keeps detailed data records for every single company and professional profile in our database. We know how we acquired that data, we know the strengths and weaknesses of that data, and we know how to maintain it and improve it. Very few, if any, other data providers are putting that much transparency and traceability into their data set. So that's the 5-step quality assurance program.
And Rebecca, if I could add something to that, then one of the other things we're very proud of here, which is very complementary to things Jack said, is the way we manage our opt-out process. Because we're very happy with how we acquire data is compliant and how we notify people is compliant from a GDPR point of view, and indeed in terms of the regulation across our markets. But obviously, and it's, we can all pretend that people like getting these calls. Sometimes people don't like being contacted about B2B marketing, and sometimes they want to opt out. And there's a critical point here. From our point of view, we want to make that process as easy as possible, partly because we want to be as compliant as possible. It's the right thing to do, but also because overall it enhances the quality of our data. And when I say the quality of our data here, what I mean is every time somebody contacts us and says, I want to opt out of your database, that is a pretty clear signal. You think about what we're doing through intent and what we're trying to do, and every organization is trying to do to analyze the sentiments of an individual. We don't want our customers to be trying to contact people who have let us know that they don't want to be contacted. And so every time somebody opts out, whilst it makes us a tiny bit sad because we want as many people in our database as possible, if we step back and think about it for a second, we realize that's actually a really powerful signal. And we don't want our customers to be calling people who don't want to be contacted and are just going to waste their time. So that's another way in which, through being compliant and leaning into GDPR compliance, we're actually improving the accuracy of the data and the value of our data for customers.
And the flip side of that, Simon, is actually when we send those notices to be able to opt out, if we get a bounced email back because that user is no longer with that company or they've retired, et cetera, we actually now know to take that record off our database. So that's another way that we're improving our data by taking in part in compliance and being a market leader there.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm going to skip through some of the questions that I have because you guys are answering them way ahead of it, which is awesome. Nadeem, we're going to jump to you. How does required compliance with GDPR impact how your sales and marketing teams approach their duties? We talked a little bit about it, but I'd love to hear from you as a head of the revenue and growth team. And then how has the strategy changed over the past maybe 2 years, 2.5 years?
Yeah, and I think this one will be a question that I think everyone will probably add some color to because it's it's a really great question. I think there is like required compliance is a framework that organizations build, okay, and it is really from the strategy perspective, it's critical that we understand that different companies in different countries will interpret these frameworks in different ways, okay? So it goes back to, very early on in the conversation where we were talking about different countries and different cultures. So it's our job to be respectful and thoughtful around that. and then to be able to align those conversations based on the interpretations of those frameworks. So this is why, Simon has built the knowledge and the depth in his organization to ensure that both, sales professionals like myself and my team and marketing professionals can utilize all of these resources in order to drive those consultative conversations based on those customer frameworks. So it's definitely changed, and I think it's an area that will continuously evolve, but it doesn't have to be as complicated as we think it is. Like, if you're having a conversation around this, you may think, oh my God, compliance, oh my God, GDPR, but at the core of it is very simple, but the concepts around it can be complicated to understand, only because you make it complicated. But it's not as difficult as we potentially think it is. So I think, yeah, that's how it's kind of continuously evolved for us.
Yeah, and you know what, Nadeem, it really struck me when I joined ZoomInfo in January, and as our London office has grown through the year, it's the first time I've personally sat among a team building a business like this, and a bunch of SDRs and a bunch of AEs who are talking to customers all the time. And I was surprised at how often privacy and compliance comes up in conversation. And very often it's not the biggest thing. Very often it's, it's just in passing, but I'm sitting there typing away and my ears obviously prick up whenever someone says GDPR or privacy, whatever. And I'm really proud of how our teams handle those discussions and really engage with customers on their concerns. But I was surprised at how really at some point in most data conversations, within Europe at least, it comes up. Often not a showstopper, often not more than a couple of minutes conversation, but it's in there somewhere.
And I think
it's really
not in Europe either, right? I mean, this is going to come down the pipe in the US at some point. There's lots of regulatory scrutiny around this issue as well. So even if you're based in the US and maybe you're concerned about GDPR to prospect into Europe, you also need to be aware that, very similar types of regulations, Simon hit on this before, right? These global data privacy regulations, they tend to be very similar in terms of what they cover. So if you just take our approach at ZoomInfo, which is to just use the GDPR as sort of the gold standard for what data privacy is, you align your compliance and your sales and marketing teams around something like GDPR, you're really not going to have to worry as much down the road when you try and enter new markets that have different compliance regulations, et cetera. You're going to be set from the start.
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Jacques, let's really quickly, I know we've got about 15 minutes. We have a couple other questions we can toss to you guys, but I think we haven't talked necessarily about the other players in this space when it comes to how they differentiate from ZoomInfo and around data handling. So I'd love for you to, if you can give us a little kind of competitive analysis and how we differentiate from our competitors around data handling.
Yeah. So I'm going to be careful to not mention any names specifically here, but ultimately at ZoomInfo, we view our data a lot like an iceberg, right? So the amount of data that we don't publish is a testament to our focus on data quality. And let me break that down, right? So if you have a database that's going to provide you 12 possible email addresses for the CEO of Barclays, that's not only going to be unusable to your team, but it's also going to cost your business by wasting prospecting efforts. It's going to risk your email reputation. And worse, it could lead to a costly data compliance issue, right? So that's why data compliance and security sits at the core of our data engine at ZoomInfo. Accuracy is a core tenet of data collection laws like GDPR, and only accurate data allows us to serve the required data collection notices that we talked about before in an effective manner. So data is not stagnant. And for our customers who are on go-to-market teams, if they want to be successful, they need the freshest data at their fingertips. And that's because changes can happen at any point in time. And that's why our proprietary data engine is proactively monitoring the business landscape and ensuring that we add, adjust, and even remove data points as relevant. So in fact, we've analyzed 480 million professional profiles and 1 billion company profiles. and we publish 235 million professional profiles and 100 million company profiles. So our goal is, of course, to continuously grow that number, but in some instances, we've determined that we will not publish a data record, or maybe, we have to remove an outdated piece of data. So a person might have added themselves to a do not call list. They may have retired, so the email address is outdated. A contact may have moved jobs, and now they have a new email address. That's happening more than ever in today's world, right? So quality and compliance are going hand in hand, and we appreciate that our prospects, our customers, everyone in the B2B world, they're putting their trust into ZoomInfo that we're providing long-term and sustainable value for their business, but also that we're taking care of, business contact information of those data subjects. So we have the people, we have the processes, we have the technology to bring to market the world's broadest, most accurate, and compliant B2B data in the world. And I think at the end of the day, in this game, size really matters, and that's really what sets ZoomInfo apart.
Wonderful. And I think just to wrap this up, Nadeem and Simon, I'd love for you both to, and we'll start with Nadeem, just give us that one takeaway, one piece of information, one advice, any form of advice that you can give to the audience that they can take away right now around data compliance, around how they should do it as sellers, as marketers, anything in that realm. Nadeem, would love for you to hear from you just one takeaway from today.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rebecca, and I really appreciate, the conversation that we've had so far, and I think this will be really helpful for our listeners as well. I think the piece of advice that I would give is don't overcomplicate it. I think it's very, very easy to make it sound more overwhelming than it is. Like and I'm not saying that you shouldn't understand and educate your teams. You absolutely need to do that. But I think having a conversation with your customers, especially if you're from a sales function or a marketing function, having your conversation with your customers in layman terms and just making it simple, because that's what customers understand and appreciate. And I think the key takeaway that I would give is make sure that you understand it enough in order to drive a simple, to the point, direct conversation. And if you then need additional support or help, or you need to dive deeper into certain elements of that particular conversation, then you bring in a subject matter expert into those conversations. So I think I'm a big believer of keeping things simple. So that's probably the advice that I will give is just learn, but keep it simple.
And I would echo what Nadeem was saying about keeping it simple. You can get wrapped up in a lot of legalese around here, and as in any technical area, the deep experts will love talking about the minutiae. But really, when it comes down to it, when we're talking around privacy compliance, it should be easy just to have some empathy for how you'd expect your own data to be handled in the same situation. So if you're sitting there and you're being offered a data set by a vendor, or you have access to some data and trying to work out how to use it to engage with folk for your B2B marketing, have a think about how you'd feel on the other end of that, or how you'd feel if your employees or even your friends and family were on the other end of whatever you're going to be doing. And if you are behaving in a transparent way, a respectful way, a thoughtful way, then again, you're going to be going a very long way to achieving compliance before you actually start to look at the individual regulations and the like. So put yourself in the shoes of the people you're trying to market to and think about how they would like their own information to be handled, and that will go a long way to compliance.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you all, Jacques, Simon, Nadeem. You've delivered a fantastic amount of information, a lot of it as well. So I know our audience definitely needs some time to digest. But I really appreciate you all being here and delivering this information. And then thank you, audience members, for joining us today. We will share this recording of this session within 24 to 48 hours after we conclude. So keep an eye on your inbox for an email from ZoomInfo. We'll make sure the Privacy Center is linked in those emails as well, so you can have direct access to that and not have to search around the web for it. And again, feel free to fill out that survey. Let us know if there's any changes, length of time, type of content that you'd like to see differently or more of. Feel free to fill out that survey, and have a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you sit in the globe.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.